in the Trump administration. We are mere minutes from the president celebrating the most substantial set of tax cuts in 31 years. What you're seeing now here, just a bunch of buses, but it's who's jumping on these buses. This is so significant, right? They're going to be taking these Republican lawmakers from the Capitol down the street to the White House for this symbolic signing of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The official version of the law will be ready a little later, version of the bill for the president to sign into law. It is President Trump's single major legislative accomplishment since taking office 334 days ago. Its passage went nearly as planned. Overnight, the Senate passed the law, had to make some technical changes, which is why the House was actually forced to hold that revote today. Obviously passed. No Democrats, I should note, voted for the bill. So it's a pretty sure bet that they won't be the ones boarding any of these buses at the Capitol, waiting to take all these Republicans to the White House to celebrate. Earlier, the president reveled in the success of passing this new legislation. He not only hailed the fact that it cuts most individual tax rates and drastically cuts business taxes, but he also touted that it ends the Obamacare rule that people had to buy health insurance or pay a fine.
When the individual mandate is being repealed, that means Obamacare is being repealed because they get their money from the individual mandate. So the individual mandate is being repealed. So in this bill, not only do we have massive tax cuts and tax reform, we have essentially repealed Obamacare, and we'll come up with something that will be much better.
We have Phil Manningly, who is inside the Capitol for us. But let's begin, Sunlen Sirfati, with you just outside where all these members of Congress are boarding these buses. And Sunlen, as they've been passing you, has there been high-fiving? I mean, what's the sense from these Republicans ahead of this big victory lap at the White House?
Yeah, certainly the mood, Brooke, is way up here on Capitol Hill right now among Republicans. And this is essentially the start of the Republican victory lap. These buses behind me, I'm going to step out of the shot and show you there is a long line of idling buses, 5 buses here ready and waiting to take Republican members from the House side of Capitol Hill to the White House today, where they'll gather on the south lawn of the White House and celebrate this big legislative accomplishment with President Trump. Moments ago, we saw, of course, the House passed their second version of the tax bill at 224 to 201. No Democrats supporting it, 12 Republicans voting against it. Certainly a big day, and certainly there'll be a lot of pomp and circumstance later today from the south lawn of the White House when President Trump touts this big achievement. We saw him release a statement immediately after the House vote just in the last hour, talking about how this is a big, beautiful Christmas present. Expect, Brooke, that sort of rhetoric today at the White House as well.
So before we think ahead to the South Lawn, Phil Manningly, as you have been, knee deep in all of this for so long, and you co-wrote this in-depth piece on how Republicans learned from the embarrassing failure of repealing and replacing Obamacare. What did the party do differently this time to get this win in 3 months' time?
As much as humanly possible, to put it bluntly. Basically, they wanted to take their failure on Obamacare and do everything differently. That meant that instead of a top-down approach where the bills were kind of crafted by leadership, maybe without buy-in from the opposite chamber or from the White House, they wanted everybody involved from the get-go. That's why the Big Six existed, essentially Senate leadership, House leadership, the key committee chairs, and members of the White House. But they also wanted to make sure their rank and file were deeply involved. You saw it on the House side of things, taking the members off of Capitol Hill so they couldn't see the initial proposal and then come out and attack it straight to the media. They almost wanted to sequester them, walk them through, almost tire them out with as many details as they possibly could and try and get them on board. You saw a very similar thing happening in the Senate. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Senate Finance Committee Chairman Orrin Hatch, really making sure that their committee members were deeply involved, deeply engaged from the staff level on up from the very beginning of the process, and making sure that the rank and file members were read in as well before we all were, something that tends to frustrate members when we know more than they do. But Brooke, I think there's 2 other really key components here. First, tax cuts are very different than healthcare policy when it comes to the Republican Party. Republicans like tax cuts. Republicans campaign on tax cuts. On healthcare, they don't agree with the future of how the healthcare system should be. You have very polar opposites inside the Republican conference in both the House and Senate, but you also can't overstate the impact of the failure of Obamacare on this process. Lawmakers in both chambers have told me they went home for the August recess and got hammered, just stinging rebukes for their inability to get get something done. When those lawmakers came back to the Capitol Hill, I've been told by several aides who are deeply involved in this process, their willingness to do something, anything, no matter how difficult, would just overwhelm this entire process. That's how they moved through something that, as you noted, hasn't been done in 31 years. They were able to get it done, Brooke, in 3 months.
Willingness to do something. They did a very big something, and so we also expect to hear, as we've heard from House and Senate leadership, we'll hear from the president, essentially promises made, promises kept to the American people on taxes. Phil Mattingly, thank you so much. Let's broaden this out and just talk about this watershed moment for the Trump administration. Obviously, we've got eyes on buses and these Republican lawmakers, right, heading to the White House. But with me now, I have CNN's senior economic analyst Stephen Moore, former advisor to the Trump campaign, Professor Jennifer Taub of Vermont Law School, who wrote the book Other People's Houses about the 2008 financial meltdown. Also with us, CNN political analyst Julie Hirschfeld-Davis, who is White House reporter for the New York Times, and Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief of The Hill. So, welcome to all of you. And, Julie, just listening to the president earlier today, this is his final cabinet meeting of the year, a glowing self-report card, if you will, talk tax reform, repealing the individual mandate, the economy's booming. I imagine that was a warm-up of what we're about to see from the South Lawn.
Well, absolutely. I mean, President Trump has been waiting for the opportunity to take a victory lap. Of course, we saw him have a similar event outside the White House earlier this year on health care, hoping that they were going to get there in terms of repealing Obamacare. And of course, they didn't get there. So for him to be able to end his first year with the tax cut that he promised is a huge moment for him. I'm sure we're going to hear unrestrained boasting and celebrating, thanking of the congressional leadership, which he has not always been complimentary of, as we've heard the last few months. But I think, as Phil Mattingly said earlier, they put all their eggs in one basket with this, and they really had to do things differently than they did them on healthcare in order to have a win at the end of the year. And he has pulled it out, and he's managed to keep the process on track and keep himself out of the process enough so that he allowed it to work, and they got to the finish line on this one.
Stephen Moore, congratulations. You have. It's a big win, and within the win, and the president mentioned this earlier, although I think he was sort of saying members of Congress, he had said, don't mention it too much, but eventually, part of this is the repeal of the Obamacare individual mandate. Also what's happened in terms of achievements, the opening of Anwar, that Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, something that Bush 43 tried to do unsuccessfully. He has successfully nominated 12 appeals court judges, and also, of course, you have Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. Despite his distracting tweets all year long, Stephen, do you think people, and I mean not just his base, but more broadly, do you think they're starting to notice what this administration has gotten done?
Well, it's been 2 years now. I was just reflecting on this morning when I first met Donald Trump, when we first started talking about a big tax cut to really revitalize the economy. And here we are with the bill signing that's coming up in a couple of hours. And it's really, it is an amazing victory for those of us who believe that a tax cut was necessary. And in fact, what's really interesting is this tax plan that was voted on today is really not too different from what Trump originally proposed. I mean, there are some differences, but I'd say about 80%. I think Phil Mattingly had it exactly right. Brooke, that there
as
was,
he always does.
Well, there was just no room for failure here, and I think Republicans did know that failure would have led to catastrophic consequences for the Republicans politically. I'll make one last point, if I may.
Sure.
Now we don't have to debate the merits of this bill anymore. We've been doing that for weeks and months on this show. Now Republicans have to deliver. In other words, the economy has to deliver the promised results. I'm one of those people who do think that we're going to see a big burst of growth and continued strong stock market and continued strong job market. And if that happens, then I think Republicans will feel very vindicated.
I think the Senate Majority Leader, though, did allude in an interview with one of our correspondents, you still need to go out and sell it to the Americans, right? People are worried that they'll have less money, despite the fact that they will start seeing some of them, a bit more in their paychecks starting in February. Jennifer, here's my question for you, because obviously this is great news for Republicans. We've talked about these polls, though, and the Republicans knew, it shows the majority of Americans were opposed to this particular plan. You have the Democratic leader in the Senate saying that this bill is, quote, going to be an anchor around the ankles of every Republican. And I want everyone to watch this moment from the Senate floor.
Nearly 145 million middle-class families under 200,000 will either get tax hikes. Can we have order, Mr. President?
The Senate will be in order.
This is serious stuff. We believe you're messing up America. You could pay attention for a couple of minutes.
We believe you're messing up America. Jennifer, what is the liability if the plan doesn't deliver on the promises sold?
Thanks, Brooke. It's really doubtful that this plan can deliver on the promises because based on available evidence, tax cuts for the very wealthy do not actually result in expanding the economy or creating jobs. What the available evidence suggests, however, is that by cutting the taxes on the upper echelon, what we do is we concentrate wealth at the top. We increase income inequality. And that's not what we need right now at all. So the consequences will be, I believe, when people see that the modest tax cuts that they have now, which will expire soon, they're going to see that those tax cuts are definitely outweighed by the cuts they actually get to other services. So, for example, we've heard that, for example, a single mother earning $30,000 a year would get about $700 more in her paycheck. But at that income level, she would qualify for her children for CHIP. But the CHIP program, which is the children's health care program that benefits about 9 million children, is being cut. So in addition, because the individual mandate is being cut as a result of this tax bill, her insurance premiums would go up if she now has to purchase them in the private market. So people are really smart. There's a reason why the public is skeptical, because they understand that the Republicans are giving with one hand, but taking a heck of a lot more with the other with this plan.
You know, it was a Democratic congressman talking about how the Grinch stole the middle class tax cuts. And Stephen, I do want you to weigh in. But Bob, I want to hear from you first, because we heard from the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell acknowledging, you know, listen, Republicans need to get out there and need to sell this. Listen.
Yeah, they do.
Do you believe there's a need for Republicans to go out and sell this bill, given kind of how Americans are currently viewing it?
Absolutely. I mean, we're looking forward to it. My view of this, if we can't sell this to the American people, we ought to go into another line of work.
Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, they're going to have to sell it. It's not popular now. It has a shot to be more popular when people see the effects of it. But, you know, the parties used to agree on sweeping legislation, whether it's the Reagan tax cuts or welfare reform in the 1990s, even the Bush tax cuts. A dozen Democratic senators supported the 2001 tax cuts. Now we're seeing over the last decade, Obamacare gets passed through Democratic majority, rammed through, and then now this doesn't get any Democratic votes. So it's a sign of party unity and strength, I think, that the Republicans got this through. Strength they lacked and unity they lacked on health care.
I mean, Stephen, you can already see, depending on what happens, a lot could happen between now and, you know, next November in the midterms, but you can already think of these, you know, the ads for Democrats in the Republican tax bill making the rich richer. I mean, this could be momentum for them. They could use this as a boon for them. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think one of the important developments of last week was when Donald Trump said that the withholding tables are going to start changing by February. So by February, tens of millions of Americans will see that their taxes are actually being cut. You played that little clip from Chuck Schumer saying all these Americans are going to have a tax increase. It's just false.
But what about after 2025 and then the sunset rules and all of that?
I'm talking about this year and next year and the year. I mean, 2025, the world's going to be a very different place. And by the way, I fully assume that those tax cuts will be fully extended. But I would make one other quick point. You know, you mentioned the Obamacare issue. You know, for Republicans, this is almost a 2-for-1, because not only does it cut taxes, but it also does repeal a key feature of Obamacare. It liberates about 15 million Americans who are lower or middle class that have to pay this penalty for insurance that they don't want. I think when people see that, they're going to be pretty happy about that. They can now go in the private market and buy a health care plan that'll cost them about half as much as Obamacare does.
Jennifer, how would you respond?
You know, I'm quite disappointed to hear people considering it a victory when more than 13 million people are going to lose their health insurance.
They don't want the health insurance. They don't want it. That's the reason they're going to lose it. They don't want it. they can't afford it.
I think that children may not, for example, children who have health insurance probably don't understand why it's important to them, but I sure believe parents do. I also want to say we're nearing the 10th anniversary of the global financial crisis. And as you all may remember, that was the biggest economic downturn since the Great Depression. And since then, banks are having record profits and bankers are getting their bonuses, and folks who are wealthy and invested in the stock market have definitely recovered. But, the broad middle class, and that includes people, there were 5 million people who lost their homes to foreclosure. Most of the middle class and poor depend upon wages for income, and their investments are in their home, and we still have, nearly 3 million homes that are underwater. So for most of us, we're just finally, feeling the recovery, and this is just outrageous that we would be, we would do this, that we're going to expand income inequality. We have the top 1% that is now has 40% of the nation's wealth. This is the highest wealth inequality since the 1960s. And we're talking about more than 93 million middle-class Americans who are going to get a tax hike by 2027.
I'm listening to Jennifer and Stephen. Obviously, we have you on from very different perspectives for a very good reason. And Julie, let me just cut through that and just loop back around to you, because it's a perfect argument from both the left and the right on why this is great and why it's not great. And I'm just wondering, as we roll into 2018, will this sort of win from the perspective of Republicans? How long will this linger, and will it be enough to help them, come midterms in 2018? And also, what about the Democrats?
Well, listen, I think what you're hearing is a preview of the kind of debate that we're going to hear all year long next year from Democrats and Republicans about are you better off and why aren't you, or why are you? And I think this, a big risk for the Republicans and for President Trump at the end of this year was to not have anything to have shown for the first year of unified Republican control. But just
Julie,
the fact that they were able to get this.
We're rocking and rolling with live TV. We're going to go to Capitol Hill here. We're going to hear from the Democrats, the Senate Minority Leader and the House Leader here, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Now, we know they're popping champagne down Pennsylvania Avenue. There are only two places where America's popping champagne: the White House and the corporate boardrooms, including Trump Tower. Otherwise, Americans have a lot to regret. First, I want to respond to some comments that Senator McConnell made on the Senate floor this morning. His opening comments. First, he said, I brought them along because they are so good to use. This is McConnell's transcript. Now, here's what he said. First, he said, the Senate accomplished something really remarkable. He's right. To pass a bill of tax cuts and have it be so unpopular with the American people is an amazing achievement for the Republicans. It's never been done before. To have, for the first time, according to a Wall Street Journal poll, Americans prefer Democrats to Republicans on taxes, it's truly remarkable. Great accomplishment, Mitch. Great accomplishment, Republicans. Now, second, he said he championed the open process the tax bill went through. Sure, they went through an open process. Only if you define open by one party negotiating behind closed doors, having one markup with only one expert witness, while voting down every single amendment proposed by Democrats. If anyone believes that this was an open process, then I have a bridge back in my hometown to sell you. Then Senator McConnell told us this bill was passed to encourage job creation and put more money in the pockets of working men and women. Well, if you believe trickle-down economics, he's right. The trouble is no one in America, not the American public, not the economists, believe that trickle-down works. Corporations are flush with cash right now. The stock market's booming. Job creation isn't. Look at all the companies that have already said they're going to use their tax break for stock buybacks, for dividends that don't affect average Americans. And I love the example of AT&T. Over the last 10 years, AT&T has paid an average tax rate of 8% a year. They have 80,000 fewer employees today than they had then. Tax breaks don't lead to job creation. They lead to big CEO salaries and money for the very, very wealthy. And finally,
Okay, so
Senator
we're going to pull away
McConnell,
from this. Clearly, you can understand the frustration from the Democrats here. And Bob Cusack, you cover the Hill. To hear the minority leader there talking about, basically poking fun at the Republicans and their alleged open process. I mean, isn't that the exact same argument? Put the parties in reverse from Obamacare, however many years ago that was.
Yeah, no, the similarities are endless between that bill and this bill, without doubt. I mean, Nancy Pelosi said this tax cut bill is the worst bill in the history of the U.S. Congress. So that's a bold claim, and this is. But the thing is that Trump now owns the economy. There's been debate over who should get credit, whether that's President Obama or President Trump, for the economy that has improved this year. Now it's Trump's economy. So if it does well, he owns it. But if it goes south, he owns that too.
Julie, just close us out as. I don't know if they're quite popping bubbly in those buses heading to the White House, but certainly we are about to see a mega victory lap from the South Lawn of the White House, led by the president.
Absolutely. I mean, this was an improbable push, 3 months to pass a massive tax bill, and they got it done. I do think, though, Bob is right, and as Steve mentioned earlier, what's going to really matter is what people feel in the economy in the year to come. And the president insisted there be a middle-class tax cut as part of this bill, but there is a lot of this bill that goes to corporations and to wealthier taxpayers. And if what the middle class is feeling negatively next year is not offset by what they get out of this, Republicans will feel it at the ballot box. Unified Republican support of this means that Republicans have a lot to lose in the elections next year if people don't feel quick benefits from it.
You are so right. It's how people will feel as a result of this big change for them. Bob and Julie, thank you both so much. As we've been looking at these live pictures here from Capitol Hill, these buses maybe about to be leaving there, heading just down the road to the White House ahead of this 3 p.m. Eastern event to celebrate their tax victory. We'll take that live. There you go. Pictures outside of the Capitol. Also, does New Jersey Governor Chris Christie still have an axe to grind with Jared Kushner? Listen, these two certainly have a long history. What Chris Christie is now saying about Kushner's role in the Russia investigation. Don't miss this. You're watching CNN Live coverage. I'm Brooke Baldwin. Welcome back. There they go. And the buses are rolling on along, headed from Capitol Hill, full of Republican lawmakers, fresh off of this tax victory, headed to the White House for the big celebration with the President of the United States there from the South Lawn. We'll take that live momentarily. Meantime, we will hear directly from the president. Then stand by for that. Now, as for one of the president's sons, Don Jr., he is suggesting there is a conspiracy at the top levels of government to block his father's agenda.
My father talked about a rigged system throughout the campaign, and people are, oh, what are you talking about? But it is, and you're seeing it. There is, and there are people at the highest levels of government that don't want to let America be America. They don't want to let the little guy have a voice.
Don Jr.'s freewheeling comments at an event for young conservatives in Florida came after he spoke earlier this month before congressional investigators, and as he and others on the right continue to rally against special counsel Robert Mueller and his investigation and attack the media's coverage of the Russia story. So with me now, Shimon Prokopez, CNN crime and justice reporter, and Michael Zeldin, CNN legal analyst and former federal prosecutor who worked with Mueller at the DOJ. Gentlemen, good to see both of you. And first, just on Don Jr., Shimon, I mean, what does it say that Don Jr., the president's son, is peddling conspiracy theories?
I mean, not surprising, right? Don Jr. has done this before. He's done this on Twitter. He's had this sort of response to this investigation along the lines with most people on the right. A lot of the same, what we're hearing from people on the right, that there's this deep state kind of trying to take down the president. And the deep state would include certainly members of Congress. But then, you also have to think that this would involve people at the FBI, people within the intelligence community who have been investigating this, who have been investigating Russia's meddling in the election, and then you have the special counsel, which is looking at people close to the president, including his son, for that meeting, Don Jr.'s meeting at Trump Tower in 2016 with a Russian lawyer, where, as we know, they talked about, they claim to have talked about adoption at one point, and then it was about dirt on Hillary Clinton. And Don Jr. has been on the Hill several times now, been asked questions about that. And also that meeting is also part of the special counsel investigation. So there's no surprise here. This just continues on the path, kind of continues in the way folks on the right have been treating this investigation and really what's been going on.
Well, Don Jr.'s most recent words have certainly been out in the ether, and many people have responded, including Michael Zeldin, including the former CIA Director General Michael Hayden. Listen to this.
That's more than just a little bit scary. That is a barely coded attempt to say America should be governed by the unchecked will of the executive. And those so-called forces pushing back, they also go by the popular name, the rule of law, and the system of checks and balances that have governed us for 2.5 centuries. From the outside looking in, this is the family that is used to getting its way. And when people stop that from happening, they're viewed as enemies rather than, in the American political system, doing their job with competing and co-equal branches of government.
Michael, listening to that, how do you see it? And knowing Mueller, how do you think he sees it?
Well, I'm not sure that Mueller cares one whit what Don Jr. has to say to a group of conservatives down in Florida. The thing that strikes me, sort of humorous in a sense, is where is Don Jr.'s lawyer? Why is he letting Don Jr. make these sort of statements? Because if Mueller is in fact listening, he can't like it. I don't think he cares, but he can't like it if the accusation is that Mueller is somehow part of a deep state conspiracy whose job it is to undermine the legitimacy of his father's presidency while the kid is under investigation for coordinating with foreign nationals to impact the Federal Election Commission's integrity. It's stunning to me in its sort of lack of, sort of thoughtfulness from a legal jeopardy standpoint. But that's Don Jr.
Sure. So from one of the president's son to son-in-law, Michael, let me stay with you and just talk about New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. He is speaking out against Jared Kushner, and he had this to say about him.
I'm telling you that he deserves the scrutiny. You know why? Because he was involved in the transition and involved in meetings that call into question his role. Okay. Well, then if he's innocent of that, then that will come out as Mueller examines all the facts.
Well, I mean, obviously bad blood between the two. We know the story with Kushner's dad and Chris Christie, right, some years ago. Do you think that that's just part of this, or is there more at play?
Well, so backing up for a second, Christie sends Kushner's dad to jail.
Yep.
That doesn't create good relationships among people. Then Kushner, according to Christie, gets Christie kicked off the transition team and loses him, a coveted attorney general appointment or some other such thing. Again, another sort of thorn in that relationship. But in its most benign sense, Christie, if he's talking as a prosecutor, says simply, the guy had a role in the election, in the transition, and in the administration, all of which are under the mandate of Mueller, and so therefore he must be looked at. So in its most benign sense, Christie is just saying, as a prosecutor, looking at this guy, of course he's part of the investigation. But of course, with that bad blood history, I don't think he's saying it without some, level of happiness that perhaps his tormentor is now facing some of the, scrutiny that, you like to see happen to your adversaries.
Sure. Michael Zeldin, always a pleasure. Thank you. Shimon, thank you. If we don't talk before the end of the year, happy holidays, gentlemen, to both of you. Thank you. Coming up here, Republican lawmakers, they are in these buses on their way to the White House right this very moment to celebrate their big victory on taxes. And we are standing by to hear directly from the president on all of this. Also, if you ever needed proof that every vote counts, look at the state of Virginia. A Democrat wins a race for state delegate by just one vote. Coming up here on some of these live pictures, the beginning of this motorcade of all these buses heading toward the White House from Capitol Hill, full of jubilant Republicans, certainly celebrating this first major legislative victory since the president took office some 11 months ago, this historic Republican tax overhaul. So what about the substance, though? What exactly is in this Republican final plan? Let's take a look. The sweeping tax overhaul will lower most individual tax rates, nearly double the standard deduction, eliminate personal exemption, it caps the state and local tax deductions, and eliminates the Obamacare health insurance mandate. Trying to figure out how the Republican tax overhaul may affect you and your you and your family, that can be a daunting task. There are key financial moves, though, that you can make right now before the end of 2017 to fully take advantage of these tax code changes. CNN's chief business correspondent, Christine Romans, has a look at that. What'd you find, Christine?
Brooke, there are a few things you can do before January 1 to lower your tax bill for next year, or at least try. If you can, prepay property taxes this year. This is for high-tax states. The tax bill caps the state and local tax deduction at $10,000. So if you prepay this year's property taxes, you can deduct them under the old rules for 2017. But remember, real estate taxes are at the local level, and each jurisdiction is different. Even just calling around this morning to different tax offices, you're going to get different rules for different municipalities. So check with your local office to see if you can pay right now, or check with your accountant. Also, defer any income you can to next year for lower tax rates. I'm talking about bonuses, maybe some commissions. You can also try to pay any expenses that will no longer be tax-free, like work-related expenses and tax prep fees. Again, talk to your accountant. You can make charitable donations today that you would have otherwise made next year. If your tax rate falls in 2018, your 2017 deductions will be more valuable. What do I mean? Here's an example. For a married couple making $160,000, making a $1,000 donation, they currently have a 28% tax rate. So the tax benefit of that $1,000 donation is $280. But next year, their tax rate will fall, so they will save only $220. Brooke?
Christine, thank you. And also, just if you want more of a personal look about how exactly all of this that we've been talking about for weeks will affect you, there is a great piece. Just go to CNN.com for that. Next, it was a razor-thin margin of victory, an election out of Virginia. But just in this major development in the race and its potential outcome, a live report next. We're back here. We've got some breaking news out of Virginia, this major development and this much talked about state house race there. After this mandatory recount, it appeared this morning that the Democrat in this race, Shelley Simons, defeated the Republican incumbent, David Yancey, by one vote.
So excited. I had to take a deep breath. We had to pause just to make sure. The registrar did the math 4 times, but then we started celebrating. It's really neat. I think everybody has a little bit of ownership in the outcome of this election now. Everybody feels like they were the one vote that put us over the edge.
All right, so she's all smiles, but I have a feeling that that may change. I have Ryan Nobles and Juana Summers with me here on the politics of some of this. And Ryan Nobles, did she win, or is that now in question?
It's definitely still in question, Brooke. Essentially, after that vote that took place, the recount that she's talking about that took place in Newport News yesterday, a 3-judge panel had to certify the results this morning. And when they were getting ready to certify, a Republican lawyer came forward with the question of an overvote, essentially a ballot that wasn't counted yesterday. And one of the observers that took part in this recount said that they didn't think that this particular ballot was enough to be counted, that it was filled out incorrectly, and he asked the judges to reconsider that decision. Essentially, what had happened was that the person that cast this ballot had voted for Republicans across the board and had filled in bubbles for both Yancey and Simmons, but had crossed out the bubble for Simmons. Republican lawyers said that was enough for them to declare that this vote should be counted. Now, it was a vote that hadn't been counted for either candidate. They wanted it to be included, and that would throw the race back to a tie. After a long period of deliberation, the judges agreed with the Republican lawyers. That vote now counts. This is now a tie race. And Brooke, this means that now both candidates will go to the Board of Elections and they will literally pull a name out of a hat to determine not only who's going to win this House of Delegates race, but that's also going to determine who has control of the House of Delegates, because the fate of this seat will either make it a 50-50 race or a 49-51 race in the House of Delegates. So there is so much on the line, and it's basically going to come down to an election official pulling a name out of a hat.
A name out of a hat in 2017, and that decides which way the state house swings in Virginia. My goodness. I can't imagine for both of the man and the woman in this race. Ryan, thank you for the update there. We'll keep a close eye on the hat pull. Juana, let me just pivot to you, because I also wanted to talk about, I saw the statistic this morning from Emily's List, a Democratic Political Action Committee, saying 25,000 women have notified them that they are interested in running for office in the near future. That's a massive number. So on that, we talked. I talked to a woman, Kathy Tran, who won a seat in the same Virginia state legislature. She was actually the first Asian American woman ever elected there. And I said to her, listen, you know, as a woman, why did you decide to run? And this was her response at the time.
You know, I was pregnant and due on Inauguration Day. And so after the election, I wanted to give my daughter a name that reflected our values. It was really important to my husband and me, given the direction the country was taken. And so we named her Elise Minken. To us, her name means to ring the bells of liberty and champion opportunity for all. I made the decision to run when she was a month old. And, you know, I just had given a very aspirational name to this little baby, and I realized I couldn't sit on the sidelines. I need to stand up, and the moment is now to fight for those values and fight for my kids' futures.
We just wanted to show one of these women's faces, but of the 25,000 that we're hearing from Emily's List, well, what's the catalyst? What are they citing?
Well, Brooke, I think it's a lot of factors. We've seen this phenomenon happening since early 2016. More women, many of whom, like the woman you interviewed, didn't have traditional political backing, didn't have the infrastructure that you see of a traditional candidate, have decided they want to see the country go a different way and have risen up and decided that they want to run for office. I think part of it is obviously in response to the election of President Donald Trump. You now have the so-called Me Too movement that's bringing to light harassment, not just in politics and in media and these big industries, but in some of these smaller these working class industries that most people are a part of across the country. People are saying enough is enough. Of course, Emily's List traditionally represents Democrats, and that's where we're seeing the majority of this action right now.
Juana Summers, thank you so much. As we listen to you talk about these women coming forward, I want you to look at this picture on your screen of the buses have arrived. A lot of Republicans here filling the South Lawn of the White House. A jubilant day, it's certainly celebration as that massive tax reform package has passed. Just waiting for the signature from the president to make it to turn it into law. Live pictures here of that. I think we're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, more from the White House. We continue on. You are watching CNN live coverage here, live pictures from the White House. I'm Brooke Baldwin. Big day for Republicans in this country. They're about to be joined by President Trump in celebrating his single major legislative achievement since taking over the White House 11 months ago. He is about to enact the most substantial set of tax cuts this country has seen in 31 years and do a symbolic signing of this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The official version of this bill will be ready later. Its passage went nearly as planned. Overnight, the Senate passed the law, made some technical changes, passed the bill, made some technical changes, which forced the House to hold a revote. No Democrats, I should point out, voted for this bill, not a single one. Earlier, the president reveled in the success of passing this new legislation. He not only hailed the fact that it cuts most individual tax rates and drastically cuts business taxes, but he also touted the fact that it repeals the Obamacare individual mandate.
When the individual mandate is being repealed, that means Obamacare is being repealed because they get their money from the individual mandate. So the individual